What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Other Guys on the Badlands Podcast Network. I'm Jake, joined as always by Paul. The New York Jets are 2-5, coming off a miserable loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. We got to talk about it, I guess. Paul, I'll kick it over to you. How you doing today?
Oh, honestly, like I'm trying not to be hyperbolic here. Let me section it off to specifically sports related. That might have been the worst night of my life. Like to have the Jets and Mets both playing must win season ender games at the same time on a Sunday night, um, and then both performing that the way that they did is a nexus of horribleness that could only happen to a Mets and Jets fan, I think. Like, I don't think it could happen to anyone else. And then to have to sit through that and watch two TVs with just misery happening on both of them, and both teams jumped out to early leads, by the way, is so cruel and unusual that I don't even know how to put it into words today. Getting out of bed this morning was hard. Um, I spent most of the day thinking about me and you recording and how I wanted to just lose my mind and scream at everybody that's associated with the Jets. Because the Mets is one thing, right? The Mets, I actually chose to watch the Mets post game on SNY rather than watch our guy Connor on the SNY social channels doing the Jets post game because they happened at the same time last night. Because I knew that the Mets post game was at least going to be better vibes and somewhat congratulatory and reflective. Whereas I couldn't even bring myself to watch what was going to be said about the Jets at the end of that game last night. And so I spent most of today thinking, like, who do I even blame? Who am I going to flip out on? How mad can I get? And I'm sure I'll work myself there by the end of this podcast. But what I was met with in trying to plan that was just like apathy. Like I don't know how this team expects us to give a shit anymore when this is the product that comes out regardless of player personnel, regardless of coaching, regardless of front office. It's just the same drivel, the same sludge being force fed to us over and over again, week after week, year after year, decade after decade. And like I don't know how I'm expected to give a shit about this anymore. It's total apathy. It's a feeling I haven't felt since the Gaze times. And like I said, I'm sure I'll work myself into a froth by the end of this podcast and we'll end up yelling at somebody. But man, I'm just like dead inside right now. I'm dead inside.
Yeah, I think, you know, earlier in the season when we were podcasting and we were talking about this team in kind of a bleak way, I think we got a lot of feedback, like, especially like, look on the brighter side of things. You guys sound kind of dreary for where this franchise is. Like, I'm not apologizing for the bleakness anymore. This is not going to be a good vibes podcast. This is Badlands. And and I understand, like, if that's not what you need to hear on your Monday today, like, you might want to pause right now because we're going to get into it, and we're going to get into, this team. And you talked about apathy. The issue that I've been wrecking my brain around all day is like, it's not apathy. I very much care. We had such incredible expectations of this team. And now, and we'll get into this later on in the pod, but now we're in a point where not only do we have to reset our expectations and understand that, like, this is not going to be the playoff caliber, let alone Super Bowl run that we were hoping for, you start to look ahead to the future, and that's where things really start to get shitty for me. Where, like, going into this season, we had this plan, and it was, or going into last season even, it was Aaron Rodgers coming on board. That's going to drastically reshape the offense. We've got an unbelievable defense. We've got a defensive minded head coach, now replaced with another defensive minded head coach who can man this ship and, like, get the defense in the right direction as long as the offense is doing their jobs. And this could be a playoff caliber team in a weakened AFC. To now, it's like, all right, we're currently top 5 in draft position, but we have no real concrete evidence that we're going to stay there. We're not going to continue to be that bad, I don't think. And we also have no plan for after Rodgers' future. So it's really, really bleak, and it's a bad spot for the franchise to be. So, uh, tough initial overview thoughts, but I think, we'll dive into the game specifics in a sec. But I
I
just
mean,
am struggling with where to go.
Jake, as far as the negativity is concerned, like, would anybody does anybody want us to come on here and peddle you the fake positive bullshit about this team based on what we've seen the last 4 weeks? I couldn't even do that with a straight face. If Joe and Connor called us this morning and said, "Hey, we need you to toe the company line and be super positive on today, and we got to rally everybody," nope, can't do it. I can't do it. I cannot do it anymore. Like, based on everything we've watched, and to your point, right? Like, this was it. This was the last card that they played. We've tried rebuilding. We've tried young quarterbacks. We've tried bridge quarterbacks. We've tried every way to construct a roster, and it just doesn't work. It hasn't worked. And it's different reasons every time. And I think when you bring it down to this season specifically, it's not even like they're losing the same way every week. Like, one week it's this thing, next week it's that thing. I wanted to say last night at the beginning of the game, I was feeling pretty positive about Ulbrich because he was going for it on fourth down. He was showing a little bit of aggression. And I was thinking maybe this is more of the Dan Campbell type, Mike Vrabel type than it is the Mike Singletary type, because Mike Singletary was an awful head coach. He was conservative. He didn't do anything risky, right? Like, he stunk in San Francisco. I'm starting to think to myself at the beginning of the game last night, like, maybe there are some positives to take from Ulbrich. And then everything that happens at the end of the game last night, they laid down after the turnover. And so it's not even like, you think that the problem is the head coach, you remove the head coach, and then new problems spring up. And the frustrating thing about the Jets is no matter how many times, and whether you're talking about this season or whether we're talking about several seasons in the past, you keep thinking that you're hitting rock bottom, and then a trap door falls out from underneath you. And you discover a cave that you didn't even know about that now you're in, right? And it's like, okay, well, how do we get out from here? And it just keeps happening. It just keeps happening over and over again. And Connor's been saying on the main pod for weeks that winter is coming in 2026, right? And like, this is it, right? Like, you got to do something now, because it's about to get really ugly when they tear this down to the studs and they have to eat all these void years in the contracts, and they probably have to trade away some people, which, by the way, I'm not even really sad about anymore. When we're talking about the young guys that, like, some of them might have to be included in trades after the season. And you've squandered that. And now we're at a point where, look, this isn't positivity. Don't get this wrong. This is not positivity. Crazy things can happen in the NFL and all professional sports leagues. Look at what the Mets just did. They were 11 games under 500. They came from out of nowhere. They were the best team in the MLB for the last half of the season. Crazy things can happen. The Jets can run off 10 straight. The schedule's terrible. There's nobody good on the schedule the rest of the year except Houston and Buffalo. They can run off 10 straight. They can do it. Aaron Rodgers said it last night. The only way you can win 10 in a row is you win the first one, right? And so if they win next week against New England, then, crazy things can happen. But when you put yourself in a position as a team where you have to rely on the unpredictability of special professional sports leagues in order to squeak in and get a wild card, you're just not doing it right. You're just not doing it right. You're digging out of holes, whether it be on a drive-by-drive basis with penalties, a game-by-game basis with not getting early scores, or a season-by-season basis by falling into these big holes. Or even on a bigger macro level, digging yourself into holes with roster construction. And the fact that you're adding all these void years in and you're mortgaging the future, like, no matter what they do, no matter what vein we look at this in, they continue to start slow, manufacture holes, create false bottoms, discover unknown depths, and as a result of it, we're all miserable. So, like, what are we doing here?
It's crazy. All right, let's get into last night's game before we go back to like this macro level of the Jets. So one of the things that was so frustrating about last night is for weeks we have been asking this team to get out to an early lead, and that would be like a difference maker in how they could approach the game. It worked when they played the Patriots. They had an early lead last night, 15-6, gave up 31 unanswered points, just and making their own mistakes. Like the interception when they were going down the field 15-6, like right before the half, that was an insane play on a middle of the field throw where, like, that one's a bad break. Then Garrett forgot how to play football for a second, and they just like the mistakes compounded and built on themselves, and they never got it back. It was a slow, torturous, painful death. And it was like, it was the perfect microcosm of this entire Jets season as a whole. Where like, here's shiny good thing, right? Everything's going to be okay right in front of your face, and then just collapsing underneath.
Let me ask you this. How is that throw any different than a Zach Wilson throw of trying to jam it in between three defenders when you can't do that and it's ill-advised, right? Maybe 10 years ago, Aaron Rodgers makes that throw, and maybe he's accustomed to making that throw. But the end result is no different than anything we've seen here the last 6 years, which is throwing it in the middle of three defenders. Maybe it was a slightly better throw than any throw Zach Wilson would have made, but the end result is the same. It still gets picked off. It still completely turns the tide. And I'm sorry, but Aaron Rodgers going on a press conference afterwards and saying that the entire energy shifted and the vibe shifted and we never came back from it. Like, that doesn't do anything for me, dude. Like that, that's not a moment for me to be like, oh, okay, I get it. They were really deflated after an interception. I don't care. Figure it out, dude. Like you've led winning teams for 20 years. You can't figure out how to rally and yell at people on the sideline and get people like, for all we hear about him being a good leader, have you seen him scream at anybody on the sideline yet? Like, okay, he gives people dirty looks sometimes after a false start penalty. Like, are you doing anything? Are you talking to people on the sideline? I don't. The end result of that play was exactly the same as a million quarterback throws that we've seen before. The other one is squarely on Garrett Rodgers. And I don't know, is it okay to start talking about calling him Garrett Rodgers again? This is a thing I do every week now. Is it okay to start talking about Garrett Wilson not being good at this point? Like, we weren't allowed to last year, right? Can we say it now? I mean, God damn, the dude just makes game-changing mistakes every week. Every week. Multiple false starts. Ball hit him right in the chest. It hit him right in the chest. Where are you supposed to put that ball if it's not right in your collarbone down the sideline? Like, last night was so disheartening. They got ran down their throat again. They made Russell Wilson look like a good quarterback. They made it look like it was 10 years ago, Russell Wilson. Yep.
We were begging for Russell Wilson, and he picked the defense apart. And granted, there were a lot of like secondary injuries, whatever. The pass rush, non-existent for the most part. Like, they got run all over. And that was the thing too. Like, very early on in the game, I think Najee Harris had a carry for like 15 yards, and I was like, if they realize they can just bully us at any point, we are fucked. And like, that word should be going around the league. Like, especially with Russell Wilson at quarterback. I'm so shocked they went away from Fields, but the fact that they committed to Russ for a full game and we still couldn't pull it out. Again, you said the schedule is not that tough, but there's no team that I can look at and feel confident that the Jets are going to be the way.
No, you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. The schedule's tough in relation to what? Or the schedule's easy in relation to what? Are we tough? Is anybody afraid of us on the schedule right now? Right. Probably not.
If you had to pinpoint like, one thing you would change to turn the tides on this team, what would you do? Like, is it a move of shifting out Tyron and moving in Olu to try and get offensive line back to, actually giving Rodgers some time to operate in the pocket? Is it, obviously we will work Devontae more in to this offense, even though Rodgers was going from him right from the get. Like, is it a matter of just relying more heavily on Breece Hall and like, not necessarily trying to push the ball down the field as much and dinking and dunking our way to wins? Is there a fix that you can pinpoint, or is the whole thing just fucked?
I don't know if there's a schematic position change where the position change itself or the backup guy makes the difference that we need. I think that the change...
Sorry. I forgot to add the most obvious one, which is punt and kick returner, which is one positional schematic. Like, as you said that, I'm like, you're probably right, except for one fucking thing. And kneel the ball when they kick it into the fucking end zone. You've gotten past the 30-yard line 0 times. Kneel the ball, take the free 30 yards. All right, continue. Sorry.
And credit to you, Jake. You were on that early. I think before a down was ever played in this NFL season, you were saying the rule is wrong, kneel the ball. The data is going to show it. And you were absolutely right. So credit to you. Hat tip on that. I don't think that taking Tyron out for Olu, like in terms of results on the field, like Tyron has not been good, but is Olu going to be so much better that it completely changes the offense? No. Garrett Wilson has not been good, but is whatever's behind him going to make a difference? No. Right? Like I don't think there's any player sitting behind another player currently that fixes the problem. That being said, I think somebody's got to be benched, and I think it's got to be multiple people. And it's not because the players behind them are better. It's because you need to send a message to whoever needs to hear it on this team that the product that is being put in front of the fans is completely unacceptable. Sauce getting, beat on a coverage. Maybe he got hit a little bit. Maybe he got picked out of the way a little bit, but he got beat deep and he completely gave up on a play. Completely unacceptable. Sauce's disinterest in tackling, completely unacceptable. Garrett dropping that ball, completely unacceptable. False starts, completely unacceptable. And there's multiple examples of all these things. And so who can you bench? And maybe it's more than one person, but who can you bench for at least a half and say, we are holding you accountable. What you're doing is not good enough. Enough is enough. You're not playing anymore until we get it figured out. Maybe it's 5 or 6 guys, whatever that is. You need to send a jolt shockwave through this team that says, no more of this is allowed. We are going to start jettisoning players who don't listen to the program here, right? And I hate to keep bringing it back to the Mets. This is the 5th time I've brought up the Mets on this podcast already. There was a guy early this season who was a relief pitcher, and he did something stupid. He threw his glove into the stands after the game. And then in the post-game interviews, he basically said the Mets were the worst team in the major leagues. He was cut by the end of the day. He was gone, right? You can't cut Sauce. You can't cut Garrett. You can't cut most of the guys that I'm talking about on the Jets here. The reality is that guy was a bottom of the roster reliever, and it was easy to make an example out of somebody like that. But it made a difference, and it showed accountability for an organization that, much like the Jets, has lacked accountability for a really long time. And so whatever you need to do to make that happen, obviously firing the coach didn't get it done. I don't think you can bench Aaron Rodgers, although I'd be curious to see if Tyrod could do a better job at this point. And again, not talent-wise, just vibe. Maybe it's different. But you're not benching Aaron Rodgers, but somebody needs to be held accountable for what's going on, and you need to send a jolt through the locker room and through the organization. And maybe it doesn't work. Maybe that makes everything worse and the entire team quits and lays down, but we can't just keep operating the same way and expecting different results. I'm tired of hearing, just wait, we're 7 games into the season. It's not just wait anymore. This is who you are at this point, so change it. Something has to be different.
So in terms of changing it and where the franchise goes from here, first off, I want to acknowledge that I saw this Rich Samini tweet this morning that according to the ESPN Football Power Index, the Jets still have a 47% chance at making the playoffs. So a little less than a coin flip. Maybe numbers say that. I guess Football Power Index probably takes into account strength of schedule and all this bullshit. The fact that statistically it's a little less than a coin flip feels like bullshit to me. I feel like it was a coin flip that they would have made the playoffs going into the season. And granted, I was expecting them to make the playoffs, but in reality, knowing that, all right, yeah, it's probably a 50-50 shot, 50% that we're or 25% that we win the division outright and have a great year, 25% that we sneak in as a wild card, 25% that we barely miss it as a wild card, and 25% that it's an abject disaster. Looks closer to the bottom 2 than the top 2 right now. But so acknowledging the fact that they could still make the playoffs. You and I have talked about tanking and rooting for tanking and how should fans root in the past on this podcast. I am someone who in the past has rooted for the team